Speaker. This bill seeks to address the foolish and bungled amendments Labor passed in 2012, led by none other than the current Leader of the Opposition. The issues in this bill are core to the promises that we gave in the last election, and we intend to deliver on our promise to help the Australian people and the economy. This bill seeks to cut the large amount of unnecessary red tape, especially relating to the unjustifiable power and position the unions can impose on the workplace. It seeks to minimise the huge amount of inefficiency that unions bring to business whilst ensuring and entitling the rights and integrity of workers is preserved. These amendments hope to engage unions and workplaces in fairer dealing. It essentially puts the fair back into fair work. The current amount policy imposes a high amount of red tape and gives inexcusable powers to unions to frustrate and inconvenience businesses from their day-to-day operations. These common-sense amendments will aid businesses but at the same time limit but not cease union powers. Unions do have a place in society, but let us make some distinctions about how businesses and the economy take the centre role. It is Australian businesses and the economy, not unions, which line the pockets of workers. It is Australian businesses and the economy, not unions, that put bread on the table. And it is the Australian businesses and the economy, not unions, that bring prosperity to the Australian people. These amendments address the disgraceful extent that unions are impinging on Australian businesses. For example, BHP recorded that there were 676 right-of-entry visits to the Worsley alumina plant in 2010 alone. These visits require employers to set aside time and resources to attend to entry requests and must also allocate resources to the escorting permit holders on the premises. The current legislation allows union representatives to enter the workplace and enter into discussions with employees, even though the workplace may have no members of the union in question. These amendments follow on from the Fair Work Act Review Panel's recommendations, which the previous government failed to implement during their term. The review set out some common-sense practical recommendations which are reflected in these amendments. The Leader of the Opposition, who was then the responsible minister, pushed through the rushed reforms without understanding and anticipating how his solutions would be worked. They were rushed through without thinking how they would affect other parts of Australia's society rather than just appeasing their union mates. Unions, under Labor's misguided modifications, advanced the motion that unions can enter into a workplace even though no employee has sought their presence. So if the unions are claiming to represent the workers, why are they entering into workplaces without the permission of those workers they claim to represent? This is a fantastic demonstration of how Labor failed to take a macro perspective on the Fair Work Act, just like it has done with so many other areas of policy. The Fair Work amendments rebalance the powers of the unions with the efficiency of businesses. This policy ought to have the support of both sides of the House because this amendment aims to put the fair back into fair work. It aims to rebalance the personal liberties of Australian workers whilst supporting the prosperity of Australian businesses and thus the prosperity of Australia's economy. It aims to rebalance the fairness of the Act and cut red tape, which intrudes unnecessarily on Australian commercial interests, whilst ensuring transparency, accountability and responsibility of those commercial interests. This policy reflects the Coalition's central philosophies of ensuring and instilling personal liberty and choice to the Australian people. It releases the shackles that the unions have imposed upon Australia whilst allowing them, the unions, to fulfil a role in society that does not dominate or damage the liberty of Australian workers or does not dominate or damage the Australian economy. It is false to assume that workers' rights cannot hang in harmony with that of economic prosperity. These two fundamental parts of a workplace should not and will not be at odds with these amendments. Industrial action hurts employers, employees, customers and families. It is the aim of these amendments to settle industrial disputes in a peaceful manner that prevents undue action without an extensive bargaining stage. Labor's loophole in the current bill allows unions to strike first, talk later. This must be stopped. The loophole must be closed, and unions need to know that negotiation is the first step in settling an industrial dispute. Ironically, Labor's promise from 2007 will actually be legislated. The only reason why these recommendations were not legislated during the previous Labor governments is that they could not get their act together. These amendments are fair and balanced. The government is now introducing policy making sure that if an employee of the Commonwealth for some apparent reason is owed money by the Commonwealth, that the government will make sure that the employee will retain the value of that money by introducing interest payments. These interest payments will retain the value of the money owed, with the payment being calculated with a consumer price index. The amendments will also address the growing need in Australian workplaces of the necessity for flexibility. The bill at inception has seen the need for flexibility. However, just like many other policy areas, Labor identified but failed to address this very important area of Australia's modern workplace. This government is determined not to impose decisions about industrial action on the people of Australia. Rather, we enforce the power of choice to the Australian people. We, on this side of the House, give the choice to Australia and Australians. We, on this side of the House, give prosperity to Australia and all Australians. We, on this side of the House, give liberty. The amendments to the Fair Work Act not only give fairness to workers and business, but it is a sign that Australia is prepared and well equipped to handle future problems. It is a sign to investors that Australia is open for business. It gives business and investors confidence to know that Australia is mature in handling industrial disputes. Investment in Australia will ensure the future success of all Australian business and thus the prosperity of workers and the prosperity of all Australians. I'm speaking today on the Fair Work Amendment Bill because I want to bring the issue of fairness to the Fair Work debate. I note that the Labor Party has an undying adherence to the mantra of fairness. In particular, Labor fancies philosophers such as the American John Rawls to justify their attempt at redistributive fairness. However, how ironic is it that fair work, as Labor knows it, sees it and wants it, is so unfair? Fairness, by definition and practice, is entwined with personal liberty. No matter if it is a positive or negative view of personal liberty, freedom from or freedom to, fairness and liberty are related. How unfair it is then that unions can so entrust themselves in the Australian workplace in their own very inefficient way. How unfair it is then that unions take from the productive to line the pockets of the unproductive. How unfair is that? Labor used legislation when it was in government to try to protect the position of the unions. Labor knew the concept, the need and the purpose of unions was dead. Membership is going in one direction only, to the grave. It's going to zero. The union movement has been, in my experience, a parasitic beat tormenting small and medium businesses in the electorate of Tangney. I need not remind members opposite of the games of disgraced ex-union officials. Names like Jackson, Thompson ring around the homes of this nation, and as unwanted as the names of Ben and Jerry are wanted. This debate and this government is all about productivity and adding value. This debate should be about protecting those who add value, not only those that take, and most insidiously are on the take. Yes, and don't just take my word for it. How about that of former AWU National Secretary Paul Howes, who said in 2013 in relation to union dishonesty and corruption, "If we ignore any pocket of dishonesty, it will grow like a cancer." This legislation and these amendments from the government have the strong support of those members of the union movement who share the same discouragement, disillusionment and disappointment. So let me educate the good members who oppose what we're about to do, what we are in fact doing. We're acting because we said we would. We are keeping our promises, something Labor will never understand. Our plan, the fully costed policy document we took to the last election, spelt out clearly how we felt about unions. It also spelt out how we were going to make unions work for the workers again, not unions. We promised the Australian public better transparency and accountability of registered organisations. It is the Coalition's belief that Australians joining trade unions deserve to have confidence in the conduct and administration of these organisations. Let me say also that this debate takes place in the context of the ongoing inquiry by the Royal Commission into union corruption. Unions and corruption seem to go together like bread and butter. Wilson, Blewett, Gillard. The Liberal Party, ever since the days of Menzies, has been the law and order party. So how could I not support this bill? How could I not be happy about this bill as it increases the penalties for breaches of current civil penalty provisions and even criminal penalties in some cases? In sum, being light on union heavies is no longer possible. The economy and our global competitiveness position demands that we get more innovative and more competitive. Our future prosperity demands that we get the heavy hand of union mobs out of the economic tillers. If we do not act now, then due to union greed and myopia, Australia will become what Singapore's former and first Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew predicted: the poor white trash of Asia.